Louisiana versus all y'all's Recruit That Boot. Jarrett Roser here with Sam Spiegelman. And we're going to be kind of all over the map today. There's not the big overarching spend 10 or 12 minutes on Jahkeem Stewart transfer topic this week, but a few different things we want to hit on, including checking back with Jahkeem Stewart, just kind of mini update to some degree, a look at some new commitments around Louisiana, a guy who will be making his college commitment announcement Saturday in Pensacola, who has LSU as one of his most recent offers, as well as a look at some of the top quarterbacks in these 2023 and 2027 classes that we've talked so much about at different points. And Sam is fresh off the road from being out in Alabama this weekend, so I'm sure he's happy to be back home for a second there. Sam, how we doing, man?
Still here, still talking football, so can't complain, Jarrett.
Well, okay. Can't complain on a Tuesday afternoon.
That's right.
Let's hit on, I think we're going to end up probably talking most about some of this quarterback stuff, but just hitting on a couple of little notes. I mentioned Jahkeem Stewart was the big topic last week, and I know folks are still kind of on the edge of their seat, pins and needles of eligibility dynamic, and are they going to see him in a car uniform on a field at some point this fall? And, from a selfish standpoint, when they play Carr versus Aug on October 5th, I would love to be there to see that happen if he were eligible by then. But it doesn't sound like a lot has really come out in the last week in terms of what to expect. And for folks that are anxious, I would say that's not really that surprising, that some of these things tend to draw out. Do you have any expectations of, could we find out by a certain point, or how long this may drag out, or if you're kind of hearing anything leaning one way or the other?
No, there's no specific timeline for anything so far. I do know that, like we spoke about last week, the expectation is that he will be ineligible to play, but he will be, of course, enrolled and already taking courses at Edna Carr. But the LHSA is reviewing his eligibility. Edna Carr is, crossing their fingers, hoping that they can get this 5-star defensive lineman added to their already SEC loaded defensive front with Big Rich Anderson and Corey Adams committed to LSU and Ole Miss respectively. And there is some glimmers of hope, obviously, in and around the Edna Carr program. But given the background on this eligibility, on the transfer, it seems like it's very likely to be deemed ineligible. But like you said, the LHSA is reviewing the case because of the timing in particular is another reason to believe that he will be ineligible. Jahkeem playing in the scrimmage for St. Aug, playing in the Jamboree for St. Aug, then making this decision. We already know the reasons why. It's been made pretty public already in this process. So it seems like everything is trending in that direction. But we know the LHSA. Also, the LHSA just had to prepare for almost every team in the state having to survive a hurricane and all the after effects of that with loss of power and rescheduling and what goes on at all these respective schools. So I'm sure it's been in the back of their mind. They've been reviewing it. Carr is set to play their week 3 game on Friday or Saturday, I believe. I don't have the schedule in front of me. I would imagine he is not lined up for Edna Carr by then, which opens the door. Is it there in time for week 4? Week 5, can he salvage at least half of this junior / potentially senior season?
And I've been around instances in which players transfer even during the summer, during the off season, and don't receive their eligibility or non-eligibility decision until late in the regular season at that point. And there's just a lot of waiting and doing home checks and different things like that kind of drag out the process quite a bit. And so the fact that Jahkeem is transferring essentially at the start of the regular season, a month into school, kind of complicates some things. It seems like. At the same time, as much as I'm not going to say unicorn, but a rare prospect, rare player that Jahkeem is on the field, that also has a tendency to kind of change the way some things are viewed and handled and expedited and whatnot. And so I really don't know what to expect in terms of a timeline, but it shouldn't be shocking to people that we don't already have this answer, a week into him being enrolled in the new school.
Yeah, last year the most famous example was Trey'Dez Green, who was eligible to play on the field for Zachary, but ineligible for basketball. And Of course, being committed to the in-state flagship school like LSU does not hurt, but Jahkeem is uncommitted at this point. We already, his recruitment has been attached to this decision, whereas they should be potentially, for if you're the LHSA, viewed in separate lenses. But it's hard not to attach that when you know that it's not a flagship LSU or a Louisiana or a Tulane commit. It's you hate to say it, but we're not on the LHSA, so we can't. So it's sometimes it helps when you're committed in state, but right now that's not the case for Jahkeem.
How all of that transfer stuff gets handled is so interesting to me, and I know that folks are consistently frustrated with it one way or the other, and it's just such a tough dynamic that I come back to in terms of the devil's advocate of the LHSA side of things. Is for decades, people criticize the LHSA for not keeping a handle on recruiting and transfer dynamics to a better degree, and people are frustrated with players being recruited away from their respective schools. And so when guys were eligible, people took issue with there not being some sort of penalization and stuff being worked around, and that the rules weren't being effectively enforced from a lot of perspectives. And then the LHSA starts kind of handling things with a little bit tighter view, and then people are ticked off that Trey'Dez Green is only playing one sport and not two. And I think the older I get, the more I look at it and say, these are teenagers who have 4 years to play high school sports, and some things are going to happen and whatnot. But at the end of the day, why are we this concerned with taking away one of these guys' 4 years to do this for their lives? But also I understand that it's ended up being kind of a damned if you do, damned if you don't dynamic in terms of managing it and trying to keep some level of, competitive balance and all those things.
As you've aged, you have certainly sided more and more with the LHSA, and I've noticed that over the past almost decade is certainly a lenience toward the LHSA, if anything, and that has been proven true yet again, Jarrett.
No, I mean, I think the older I get, the more I have a sense of, as much as we build up high school sports and it's such a huge piece of the culture here, that at the end of the day, it's still high school sports, and that the kids, I think if you ask me, I'm more inclined to say, let kids play high school sports. I understand that there's a lot of dynamics going on here from a competitive standpoint, but do we really need to police it that hard that we're taking away these limited opportunities for high school kids? That said, I do feel like, compared to fans out around the state, that I have a better sense of, okay, the LHSA ends up kind of being put in a rock and a hard place with some of this stuff. At least there's plenty of stuff to criticize them about. There's plenty of stuff to give them some level of leeway with. But I do think that people are just going to complain about eligibility stuff one way or the other, depending on what side of that transfer they happen to support.
It's definitely a dicey situation, so I think it's fair to point out both sides. And can we introduce a segment called "The Older I Get"? ...
Yeah, man. We'll just take another couple minutes out of our day of sending Seinfeld bloopers back and forth, and just add a new segment to this show. The older,
the older I get. Sponsored by Danny Glover.
A couple of other little news type notes. 2 recent Louisiana commitments that I noticed. Tyler Welch, he's a two-way standout for Huntington. I think a DB at the next level. He just recently committed to Northwestern State. He's a guy that I think I've had in the top 100 in the Prep Red Zone 2025 class rankings for quite a while. A guy that I think can be a really nice player at the next level. Ty Powell, the fantastic specialist for Edie White, just committed to Marshall in the last day or so. A guy that I've had on so many top performers and preseason all 3A or 4A or wherever the Cardinals are in a given season lists. He's really talented field goal kicker, punter, kickoff specialist, and so a guy that I think the folks up there at Marshall will be really excited to have. And out of state, I mentioned Ladarian Clardy is a safety out there at Escambia County in Florida, who is scheduled for a Saturday announcement. I think there's been a lot of expectation of Ole Miss, maybe Florida State. He's had a top 10 for a while, was poised to commit at one point, and people expected to be Ole Miss, and then kind of pushed pause on it, and now he'll announce his commitment Saturday with LSU as his most recent offer. What is your sense of this? Is this something that LSU fans should be monitoring as we get closer to Ladarian's commitment announcement on Saturday, or is that just sort of a nice late footnote to his recruitment, and it's probably Oxford bound?
Yeah, no, I would definitely pay attention. Let's be real. Escambia County, Pensacola, Florida, very not too far away from the boot. Obviously, Corey Raymond entering late as a shakeup in their board, but Clardy has been leaning toward Ole Miss for some time. Visited a handful of times to Oxford over the summer. Was supposed to go up for Juice Fest at the end of July, and there was the expectation he would come out and commit to Ole Miss. He never made it up there, got into a car accident on the way to Oxford. Everything is okay for him, fortunately. But yeah, Corey Raymond electing to offer late in the process. We'll see if that shakes things up. But, I think Ole Miss right now should be viewed as the favorite heading into this week's announcement now, a couple of weeks after he has postponed it originally.
I have no information from trying to check on the LSU side of how seriously to take their push here late. I told you I had my little Jarrett Spidey senses tingling a little bit because Ladarian is a guy that has followed me on Twitter for I don't know how long before I even knew who he was, and a guy to become that level of prospect. I feel like obviously the bulk of my work is in Louisiana, and so I get a lot of Louisiana Twitter interactions, and I've started to get more and more out-of-state guys who are usually really under the radar guys that are just trying to have someone find them. But for
God bless your
prospects,
soul.
for prospects of a Ladarian stature to reach out and find the Louisiana versus all y'all guy, a lot of times the top prospects finding me before I find them is somewhat of a signal of their interest level in LSU because they see me covering LSU and want to get, connected to some LSU media. And he announced with the offer LSU as a dream school, which I don't know how much stock to put in that. We hear that more and more from guys. When you hear or see or whatever those notes from prospects saying, blessed to be offered by my dream school, how do you view some of that? How much stock do you put in when those little kind of special notes of this is a team that I grew up watching or whatever the case may be? How much do you kind of weigh that into some of this beyond just a typical offer post or offer announcement or conversation on the top 6 to 12 or however many schools?
I think when you're living in Louisiana, or maybe you were born in Louisiana or have family in Louisiana, you could take a little bit more stock in it. But I used to get into a lot of trouble posting when kids in the Gulf Coast, in particular, kids in Mobile, Alabama, or in Ladarian's case in Pensacola, Florida, is called LSU a dream school because often, kids in the Gulf Coast end up at Florida State or Auburn or Alabama. And they don't often end up at LSU. Now, that every coaching staff is different. I remember Coach Orgeron was a little bit 50-50 in that area, had a couple of good wins, a couple of tough losses to Auburn and Alabama, even Stanford in that mix. And more recently, Alabama and Auburn have been recruiting at such a high clip that they seem to be kind of running shop over in that part of town. Right now, Ole Miss has been the favorite for Clardy for some time. In today's age and recruiting where NIL is a factor, but also familiarity. This is 3 months until less than 3 months until signing day at this point. This is not like, at least to my knowledge, that he didn't work out for Corey Raymond during camp season, has not been visiting Tiger Stadium, and kind of as they moved along in this process, other schools have been at the forefront. So, he might have grown up rooting for LSU or watching them on TV in Pensacola. That's obviously a pretty big fan base, especially over there in Destin. But it's hard to say that LSU could be at the forefront, even though the interest might have been there prior.
Getting into some of these quarterbacks that we talked about, and we'll get to 2027 guys, and that'll get kind of interesting to circle back to some of that talk of LSU recruiting against Auburn and some other schools, some schools that have already come into the state of Louisiana with some early offers for this great 27 class. But looking at the 23 class right now, looking back to what from our perspective was the top quarterback class that we'd seen come through the state since we've been around. Arch Manning, huge national storyline right now after he got on the field this past weekend and showed a little bit of what he could do, not only with his arm, but with his legs. Eli Holstein up there at Pitt is off to a great start to the season, averaging more than 300 yards a game, nice 9-2 touchdown to turnover ratio. And so doing some things with the 3-0 Panthers right now. And Zay Tset, our guy from Scotlandville, made his start for Southern this past week against Jackson State. And so getting an opportunity to kind of work his way into a leadership role with that offense. As you kind of watch some of that unfold and some of these guys that we watched on so many Friday nights or Saturday afternoons get opportunities on these big stages now, relatively early in their career still. What was your takeaway of watching Arch do his thing and just seeing these guys start to step into these opportunities?
Yeah, let's start with Eli first, because he was named the starter right before this, a couple of days before they kicked off the season, and he has not looked back. Obviously, it was a little bit interesting when he transferred away from Alabama, but he when he went to Alabama, he was a part of a 2-quarterback class for Nick Saban. They had added quarterbacks through the portal, and they had Jalen Milroe, excuse me. Got Monday Night Football stuck on the brain. Even though I did cover Jalen Milroe as well. But regardless, Eli transferring out and going to Pitt, where they've had some success on the offensive side of the ball, even though they've had some coordinator changes. It's great to see him have that success. You talked about his touchdown to interception ratio. We know that he is a strong arm quarterback that loves to push the ball down the field, and he's found an offense where he's thriving at that. And he's got the weapons around him. And obviously, knowing Eli, knowing that he wanted to be on the field as soon as possible. He just has that gamer mentality. It's great that he found a home and is thriving in it. The Arch is just a big "I told you so" for me personally to the rest of the world. But no, not surprising one bit. It stinks that Quinn Ewers is hurt. Hopefully not for too long. But it goes to show you that what we saw obviously at different points of his recruitment and his time at Isidore Newman, his record-setting career at Isidore Newman, where he broke largely all of his uncle's records, his uncles being Peyton and Eli Manning, the guys on the Manning cast, Jarrett, pretty good football players. After doing so with a bunch of future doctors and surgeons at Newman, all the athleticism, the first time he did high jump, he won a district championship meet in track and field. He's a superb athlete. Being at Texas, obviously the jump from Newman to Texas was a pretty big leap. And we saw I think you saw the struggles, I guess, making that transition as a freshman. But in year 2, the spring game, he knocked one out of the park. He was running around making fantastic throws and showing off that athleticism that a lot of people didn't realize was such a huge part of his game. And now seeing it against UTSA, which, by the way, is full of really good players under Coach Traylor. And they recruit some of the best in Texas and some of the best in Louisiana for this podcast's sake.
And look, they actively want to be fast. That is, they're the road runners, and they try to live up to that name. And so they want speed on the field on both sides of the ball. And we watched Arch bust that run. It was pretty impressive.
Absolutely. And he's making throws off platform, and he's making kind of these, split decisions and fantastic reads. And this is he prepares as if he's the starter. I don't know any quarterback that has ever prepared harder or more for each game. I feel bad for Louisiana Monroe coming up this week, because they're going to get a well-prepared quarterback with all the disposal of his weapons his weapons at his disposal, rather. And then for Zay, we talked about Zay being probably a Power 4 quarterback coming out of Scotlandville. That for how his recruitment panned out, he never caught on with the right fit and right team. So what he's doing over there at Southern, and the fact that he's on the field, the very uber talented southpaw. No surprise, he is able to play at that level, then beyond. It's great to see him having success. I wonder, and I don't want to take anything away from Southern and the fact that he's getting to do it, in his hometown. But will bigger teams come looking for Zay because of the success he's having and because of that athletic ability that he shows at the quarterback position?
It's wild, and I'm sure Southern fans, if they're watching at this point in the video, are going to hate you for saying that. But I was on a radio show up in Oklahoma Friday, kind of previewing the Oklahoma versus Tulane game. And obviously Darian Mensah, the redshirt freshman quarterback, off to a nice start to his season for Tulane. As I'm preparing to go on that interview, I see a notification on the Louisiana versus All Y'all channel that a Georgia fan has commented on a Darian Mensah interview and talking about, man, somebody needs to get some NIL money together and go get this guy. And that's just kind of the nature of where we are, where as soon as a fan base sees someone at a non-Power 4 having any level of success, they're wondering, okay, how do we get that guy to my school next year?
100%. It is just the name of the game now in college football. And while it sometimes stings for fan bases that aren't in those, college football playoff hopeful category, it's great because, if you think about it from these kids' angles, sometimes like in Zay's case, he probably should have been recruited by a school that a little bit higher than Southern, and that's not to take anything away from them. But he was a Power 4 quarterback, and we saw that at Scotlandville. And the fact that he possibly could catch on or continue to draw eyes to Southern and be their guy and potentially go from there to play from Saturdays to Sundays sounds pretty good to me. He deserves it all.
And in that 23 class as well, shout out to Ricky Collins. That was kind of the big four for us in that recruiting class. Ricky got on the field for LSU against Nicholls State and had a few nice plays there. He's obviously waiting his turn, being patient behind a Heisman winner a year ago in Jaden Daniels and a guy, Garrett Nussmeier, who is off to a hell of a start to his first year as LSU starter and looking like a high-round NFL draft pick. That group is kind of the perspective with which we start to look at this 27 class as they come into their own, and we see Elijah Haven, Peyton Houston, and Malachi Ziegler as kind of the three guys leading that class in a lot of ways. Power 4 offers all over the country. And LSU, taking their time with the in-state class. I mentioned Auburn with an offer to Elijah here in the last week or so. And so they joined the mist. There are SEC offers in play for all three of those guys. The only 2027 LSU offer out right now is for the two-sport versatile big pass catcher Ahmad Hudson up there at Ruston High. But I think we're getting into the time frame at which we thought, okay, Joe Sloan and these guys might be making a move sooner or later on one of these in-state quarterbacks. What's your perspective on where those guys are still early on in their recruiting process, but a lot already popping off for them, and kind of when LSU is going to have to figure out its pecking order and start making moves?
We are on the clock, Jarrett.
You pulled that up quick, man.
I was preparing while you were introducing the segment. I have to be honest with you. Listen, we are again 2 weeks into the season. I would imagine by the end of this month, Joe Sloan is going to have to make a decision based off the 4-game sets of Elijah Haven, Pop Houston, and Malachi Ziegler, who are all starting varsity football games at this point. Elijah has now. First of all, I have to get the context that was Derek Stingley Jr. the leading passer at the Dunham school prior, but nonetheless, we just talked about Arch's record-setting career at Newman, and at the Dunham school, Elijah is going to be a pioneer in all of these marks, and however high his ceiling is, everyone is going to be compared to Elijah Haven for the foreseeable future because this is just year 2. And I think we're seeing a very big step forward from the same kid we saw at OT7 and then LSU camp for Friday Night Lights. And now seeing what he's learned in the offseason, as a young quarterback, it's tough to be judged and assessed as it is. But to grow and then play the way he is playing to start his sophomore season has been sensational, making big plays through the air, a lot of poise, a lot of big boy throws. And the way he is operating and orchestrating that explosive Dunham offense has been a sight to see. And we already know he is very high on Joe Sloan's list for the 2027 group. Pop Houston had a daunting task in starting against maybe the toughest defense of the state, maybe at least in that conversation, and Neville. And he still was able, that his first varsity start ever also, mind you. And then we've seen him just continue to take off from there. He's putting up absurd video game-like numbers as a central force of that Evangel offense. He's got some speed around him, guys like Nathan Green and some other talented receivers. But we're seeing exactly what we expected to see from Pop Houston in all the camp settings over the years. He has great anticipation. He is, we talked about the work ethic that Arch has. I think you're going to have to talk about Pop and Elijah in those same categories as these guys who are just over the top workaholics at their craft. We're seeing a lot. We're seeing Pop make these big boy throws, also take what he can underneath, and also exercise his mobility, which is something that we've talked about in the past that can really separate him in this eval. And then Malachi Ziegler playing for that really talented Benton squad. Um, Listen, he has to kind of go off platform and do a lot on his own. So I think he's kind of a big play machine. Um, and I think he's got maybe the biggest road to go in this development, but you love the upside. You love the traits of Malachi Ziegler. He's got a great arm. If you give him time, he can really slice and dice you up, and he can make big plays downfield. I think based on what you've seen in the early going, he's also showing a ton of his athleticism. You love the upside. But I think if you're Joe Sloan, you're probably deciding between Elijah Haven right now and Pop Houston, and I don't think you can really make a bad decision with any of these three quarterbacks in this 2027 group in a few years, where we're all going to be looking back at three future Power Four quarterbacks.
It's difficult to really zero in and have a definitive answer to this, but in terms of how you view some of the context of what a quarterback is doing at the high school level. And there was a lot of conversation in the 23 class with, okay, Arch is 2A versus Ricky and Eli are both in that really good 5A district with Catholic High and playing that level of competition. And also just the success on the field. And I think people wondered, okay, why isn't Arch winning a state championship? And they were obviously consistently competitive, but couldn't quite get over that hump. Or why is the Woodlawn team with Ricky not winning a higher percentage of its games? And so as much as you want to see a quarterback affect winning, and you love to see a guy that has that kind of winning background, and you want to see them do it against the highest level of competition, as fluid as all of these factors are in terms of the conversation, and different guys get there in different ways, how do you view some of that context and what to put more stock in, particularly as you look at now the 27 class where Pop's at the helm of a re-emerging Evangel program. Elijah is trying to get a 2A program in Dunham back over the hump. Malachi is at a Benton program that has a lot of tough matchups, and they're 0-2 right now to start the season, and they have talent there, but outmatched in a lot of these games throughout the 5A run. How do you view kind of what to take most seriously or what to put the most stock in?
I don't think it's necessarily emphasizing anything more than others, but taking the full body of work and looking at it and understanding the context, not to make rash judgments off of every single game, because there was games where Arch and the Newman offense didn't look so great, but you had to kind of see where Arch, or even go back at the film and see who, on the plays he was able to see, and the throws, were they good throws? Were they the right reads? Did he make any off-platform throws or decisions to run against a U-High defense in the playoffs that was completely out-talented compared to that Newman Newman offensive line or receivers, So I think, you have to take the combination of on-field evaluations, the context of who they're throwing to and the systems that they're in. And this is over. We're talking about their sophomore season, so it's great to go see them and get this early taste. It'll be great to go back next year and see, did they take a step forward? What are they doing better? Are they the same player? Where have they improved the most? What am I noticing now that I didn't notice last year? And then ultimately, in terms of what I'm putting the biggest credence on, is what they look like as seniors. So I think about some of the highlights from each of their careers. I mean, Arch, a lot of it was on the field, because that was our main focal point, is everything was on the field. So I could think about his early spring games. I can think about the big game of going on the road at LCA and scoring 2 touchdowns up there basically on his own. And then kind of playing U-High and St. Charles Catholic as tough as he did in his 4th year. They weren't victories on the field, but they were victories for his evaluation of showing what this kid could do with the odds stacked against him. And this is St. Charles. Most people wouldn't realize that's a really tough team to beat. And you can ask any team in the state what it's like to go against them. For Eli, you're playing Zachary. You're playing at those big games. You're also playing with a couple of weapons around you that weren't at Arch's disposal. But Eli stepped up in those big games. The nationally televised game against Woodlawn, there he was making plays. In his spring game, he was matriculating downfield. Eli also did the different camps, and he showed off that he had a cannon of an arm. He also showed that sometimes his accuracy was a little bit spotty on occasion. But he did show that he had a cannon and he had mobility and he had a gamer toughness mentality to him that showed up in big games. And, he was a winner. He won a state championship. And that goes on the resume. It certainly sticks. And Ricky, again, shined in those camp settings. You got to see him, what he would look like if he had the pocket around him that I'm sure the Woodlawn offensive line coach would have loved to have given Ricky. But he didn't get that all the time. But you saw him under a calm, composed setting, just dice up the Elite 11. He was great working in the 7-on-7 setting. And we've seen it again. The Woodlawn team, even though it's a great program, may not have won all of its games, but you saw the moments where Ricky was able to take over and control games, make plays on occasion, and you hope that projects to LSU, where he has a good offensive line, he has great coaches, and he has great players around him. And if I sound crazy, and I've been going on, it is difficult to kind of take these bits and pieces, but you have to kind of look at it as this big old pot of gumbo and try to put it what matters. And everything matters, but you have to kind of look at it big picture, make your thoughts come from there.
And look, drawing the parallel for Malachi Ziegler, you mentioned the likelihood that Joe Sloan is about to make a move on Elijah Haven and or Pop Houston. Ricky Collins is the guy that ends up the LSU quarterback from that 23 class. And obviously there were a lot of different dynamics there in terms of how all three of those recruiting processes played out. But Ricky was the guy that kind of came on stronger late after being overshadowed through so much of the recruiting process by Arch Manning, who I think everyone was overshadowed by regardless of position or state or anything. And Eli Holstein and Ricky now in purple and gold in his hometown Baton Rouge is a guy that Sloan and that Tigers program loves quite a bit. He's managed to hold on to that second string quarterback position this season and is someone they're looking forward to being a part of that roster here in the future. So a lot still ahead for all of these guys. And as much as Malachi has kind of just started to come on in the last, 8-9 months for a lot of folks, he's someone that's, I think, going to be a big piece of that conversation for the next 3 years.
Louisiana is a quarterback factory. I mean, I can go back to as early as 2022 with the great Walker Howard. And since 2023, the onslaught of the trio that we're talking about, Eli's taking over the entire Northeast college football fan base. Arch has Texas. I'm in Austin. This place is on fire with Arch fever. And then, Ricky, he's already getting all the rumblings in the Bayou. Every time we just saw Ricky a few weeks ago. And when his time has come, I know there's a lot of confidence in him in that quarterback room. And sometimes waiting is really good and you don't see it all the time. But Arch and Ricky are two great examples of waiting. And Eli's an example of kind of finding a better spot for him. And he's making the most of it. So every process can be different and doesn't make it right, doesn't make it wrong. And eventually, these kids get their chance to show everyone what they're made of.
Yep. It's going to be fun to watch these 27 guys develop the next couple years. We've already both the last couple weeks seen some talented young 28 guys that are going to be popping up more and more on our radar in the years to come. So make sure to keep an eye out because, I'm not willing to say it's a quarterback state just yet in Louisiana, but it looks an awful lot different right now than it did years ago, where we're now talking about two classes like 23 and 27 in as quick succession as they are on a national scale, and some of the early indications of what we see from some of those 28 guys. And look, there's some good quarterbacks in between too. No knock on the 24s, 25s, and 26s, but it's starting to pick up some steam for a position that we used to look forward to maybe one great one every few years. Now all of a sudden we're talking about half a dozen in the span of half of a decade.
Just what the state does. It gives us D linemen and DBs at a very high clip, and every now and then it just spews out quarterbacks.
There you go. Well, let's get the hell out of here. This has been a long episode all over the map. Thanks as always to everyone for tuning in. Thanks to Sam for taking some time on a Tuesday afternoon. He's Sam Spiegelman. I'm Jet Roser. This is Louisiana versus Autos. Recruit that boot. And until next time, y'all be well.